This week on Mutant Watch.
Hey, welcome to episode number 30 of Mutant Watch. As you may or may not have noticed, I am not Duna. However, Duna is taking a very well-deserved week off after kicking so much ass for Pride Month and busting out so many awesome episodes with so many amazing guests. Before we start anything, Duna, thank you so much for everything you did for the show for Pride Month. My hat is off to you, and I am just incredibly impressed. And so take a rest because you deserve it. Subbing in, I am Matt, and with me, Gabriel De Jesus, as per usual for Mutant Watch, and my co-pilot from Comic Watchers Show, Nicholas J. Osborne. I don't know if it's J, but it just kind of rolled out that way. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
It's Jay now. He doesn't have a say anymore.
I had a 1 in 26 shot at getting the right letter.
Whatever it was before, it's J now. I'm ready to roll with
J
it.
now. Make sure your parents know. So this week, we are shifting gears a little bit and diving into recent events in the actual Mutant comics. So we're talking Hellfire Gala post-game. We're talking X-Men #1. We're looking forward to the Trial of Magneto and so on and so forth. So Hellfire Gala, pretty major status quo shift for the X-Men, right? Let's just start there. I mean, just from a story standpoint, guys, do you feel like Hellfire Gala delivered?
I liked how the execution of the gala was done much better than the past crossover with X of Swords.
Okay.
To me, it felt like the gala was more of a setting than an actual event. Because all of the storylines of the various titles, they didn't suffer with the gala. It was used as a way for them to take the next step. And they each did it in their own different way. Wherein with X of Swords, it kind of just stopped everything mid-tracks, and it kind of got in the way of a lot of things. So I like the narrative use of the gala just as a location for everything else to be taking place in.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like whereas X of Swords was a very traditional crossover with the beginning, middle, and end, and yes, it had the story interrupt us throughout. Hellfire Gala is more like a setting, and all of these other events happen to be occurring at the setting. But if you didn't read the issue of Excalibur, for example, you're not missing a crucial chapter. And I kind of like that setup. Now, of course, there was overlap between the titles. Drunk Kurt wending his way through every title and trying to get people to listen to him about Onslaught was actually really funny. But Nick, how'd you feel about Hellfire Gala?
Ultimately, I think, if we're comparing two events, X of Swords is more the type of event that I would gravitate towards. Mm-hmm. But just the hype for the Hellfire Gala had me so excited for it that I was ready for this setting no matter what. But maybe I enjoyed the hype leading up to it more than the actual event itself. And like now that it's kind of happened and we're already looking ahead, I'm like, I think I was more excited for all the like Twitter engagement and all the fans getting hyped for all the releases of each look more than I was of like what actually happened. But it's still pretty cool stuff and a lot of stuff happening for Krakoa, so it's worth reading. And even if you do miss out, like you said, on one issue here or there, like I did, being totally honest, but you can still follow the narrative and kind of piece together what's happening.
It's really a different kind of story than we're used to seeing from the X-Men, right? I mean, this is, at least on the surface, a story about getting all fancied up and having a gala and a big social event and making a statement and with your pinky up, right? And Yeah, superficially, that's what it is. But there's a lot of gears being turned. And of course, the big event is, well, of the gala itself is, from planet-size X-Men, where Mars is basically colonized by mutants and becomes planet Arakko. That is the most baller move I think I've ever seen. And if Marvel doesn't drop the ball and stays focused, this is really going to shift the power within the entire Marvel universe for a while to come. What do you guys think about planet-size X-Men and the repercussions thereof?
I have different opinions on both parts of that question. As far as the repercussions, I'm with you. It could be a big game changer. Could really affect the way that mutants and the X-Men should be viewed within the Marvel universe, as long as they follow through with it, which it seems like they've already started doing with Krakoa.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the issue itself, I wasn't a huge fan of the delivery. To me, it felt too disconnected from the characters, which has been my big issue with a lot of modern X-Men when helmed by Hickman. There seems to be a distance for a lot of the stories along the main track. And even though it was a different writer than usual, I still felt that in Planet Size.
Mm-hmm. It's very much a helicopter view of events.
And it just it was spectacle. It was huge. It was grand, but there wasn't anything that made me care about it in the moment. I cared a lot more about it reading the other Gala issues where they dealt with everyone reacting to it.
Sure.
But it didn't make me care about what was going on in that comic.
Okay. What about you, Nick?
I kind of get that. I think I'm on the other side of things, because when I'm coming into the X-Men titles, that's sort of what I'm looking for, these big monumental shifts, especially with what's happening right now, because I can latch on to that and be like, okay, now I can take this to these other ones, because they start to get a little distant for me, where I'm like, well, I don't maybe need to follow along with that. But when something like Planet-Size X-Men happens, you're like, I got to see what's going on in all these other titles, because how are they reacting to this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a good moment for me, and it was such a memorable issue. I think it's going to stand the test of time a little bit. It's going to be something that people will point to and kind of like, remember when this happened. So just from that alone, I think it's worth it. But it's a thing with the greater X-Men lineup right now, where we're talking about like the Hellfire Gala and the, basically moving to Mars and coming up with Arakko and all of that. It's always sort of the moment is bigger than the execution. And I think that it's a part of this being such an idea generator, this whole Krakoa era. The ideas are great, but when you dig into the issues, it leaves a little bit to be desired, but it carries out through the whole lineup, so it ends up feeling worth it if you're following along to so many different titles. But I actually liked that one a lot because of what it did for it, because I feel like a lot of these issues, especially leading up to the Hellfire Gala, and even within the Hellfire Gala, it was kind of like, not necessarily slow, but not a lot of monumental events like that. And it felt like we were just leading up to the end of, what's going to happen with the Trial of Magneto, which I'm sure we're coming up to. But then Planet-Size X-Men happened, and I was like, this is what we're here for. So it was cool just in that sense.
One thing about Hickman, and by extension, his fingerprints being all over the Krakoa era, is that he's very much a story-focused writer rather than a character-focused writer. And I mean, that should be obvious to anybody that's read him. So, like what you were saying, Nick, about,
right,
and really what both you guys were saying about Planet-Size X-Men feeling like more of a spectacle than a character-centered piece, I mean, is completely on brand with his style and what he does. I just loved it. I mean, it's odd a little bit. To what you're saying, Gabriel, it was kind of a disconnect in the sense that mutants that we know nothing about and have never heard of play such a crucial role in terraforming Mars, right? The Arakko mutants are new. I really want a title that explores their culture on Mars and who they are as a people. Because really, since X of Swords kind of codified them in our world, they've sort of just been sitting in the background and on the sidelines. And I think Marvel's got a really good chance right now to launch yet another X-Men title that focuses on the Mars-based Araco mutants, especially now that Storm is Regent, you know? I mean, Storm, this is just my pet peeve, but Storm has kind of been on the sidelines, even when she's not, for way too long. And right now, like, okay, she's Regent of not just Mars, but all of the universe, which basically the X-Men just claimed. And hell yeah, I want to read that. Like, let's see that. But in terms,
another one of those like plot lines where it's set up and we kind of don't follow up on it. There's so many in the Krakoa era where they're just dangling narrative threads that we're not sure what's happening with them. Like, I really hope this isn't another one.
Yeah.
It can't be. This was
I hope not. I hope not. But also with what we have announced, unless Storm and Araco is going to be featured in Sword, there's not really any place for them to be in the current titles.
Well, but Marvel's definitely not shy about just, adding more X-Men titles. So, you got Cable and Children of the Atom coming to an end. And you got to replace them with something. And X Factor, yeah.
But they already, in a way, they already did with Way of Swords and Trial of Magneto and X Corp are all pretty new.
Newish, yeah. I guess so. But and just as an aside, I'm really bummed that Children of the Atom is now only a 6-issue miniseries. I don't know if that was always the intent, but Marvel, they play these things close to the vest. I enjoy the shit out of those kids.
They've been very cagey since it was announced as to what it was. I believe that Jordan White, near the very beginning, before even the pandemic put a monkey wrench in everything, was pretty much kind of going like, well, it could be either one depending on how many people read it.
Yeah.
So with it being delayed so massively, I think the odds of it becoming an ongoing just kept dropping. Longer and longer we had to wait for it.
I agree. And, the mystery behind that book, like, what the hell is going on? Who is a Cyclops lass? That was what was driving people to it. And people are just going to care less and less the more the book gets dragged out. But it's just been a really unique book about basically cosplayers and fanboys. And Vita Ayala, they really, in just a short amount of time, made some characters that I give a shit about. And as a grumpy old man, it's getting harder and harder for me to care about teenage characters. So my hat's off.
But it's also it's a welcoming book in a whole lineup that isn't very welcoming right now, a couple years into this whole era.
Yeah, it is.
There's a lot that you feel like you need to catch up on. And
just trying to jump into the X-Men now? Like, oh my God, where would you even start? It's just insane. Like,
well, we do happen to have a show right now that is a good entry point.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. So, I guess the big there's several big lingering questions for the X-Men coming out of Krakoa, out of Hellfire Gala, and they're going to go in a lot of different ways. Sword, I think, may be the most important X-Men book right now in terms of the overall narrative. And it should be, because Sword is incredible.
You see, Sword, I love Sword. I do, but I am hard-pressed to say that it is the most important X book right now, because Abigail Brand's entire mission statement is very distant from Krakoa. She has her own agenda, which is more of a galactic level agenda than it is an X-Men level agenda. And I would absolutely love it if Sword continued to move that way and starts putting itself more as a companion to something like Guardians of the Galaxy than over with the other 700 X books, and kind of use that as its way to be a distinction.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it also I'm not convinced that, especially post Hellfire Gala, that the long-term mutant agenda, for lack of a better term, isn't to become a galactic power, much like the Shi'ar or the Kree Skrulls. To that end, who knows exactly where we'll see going, but claiming terraforming Mars, claiming sovereignty over the galaxy. I mean, these are not the type of moves you make when you're just going to stay small fry. So I think there's still more long game to be played there. However, on the other side of that coin, you've got X-Men #1, where the new team is very much dedicated to doing the superhero thing and protecting Earth, whether or not the humans want it or care or not. And I want to come back to that a second, but some of the lingering plot threads, from Hellfire Gala, we've got the stuff out in space. We've got the epilogue, who killed Scarlet Witch, which is, of course, what's going to lead to the trial of Magneto. Now, there's a lot to unpack with Scarlet Witch being the murder victim. A lot. Holy shit. Because it's kind of been set in stone that in Krakoan society, Scarlet Witch is viewed as this pariah and this great betrayer figure. And there's some I can get behind the thinking there, even though it kind of picks on somebody with mental health issues, which is not okay. But okay, we'll take it at face value. Go ahead.
I also just want to jump in, which is, and a lot of the fandom is aware of this, but it seems, and the characters are canonically aware of it, but it seems like everyone has completely forgotten. It wasn't even Scarlet Witch who was behind it.
That's right, it was Doom.
No, it was, that was also another thing that was retconned around, but it was also Quicksilver. Quicksilver is the one who manipulated
that's right.
Scarlet Witch mid-emotional breakdown.
That's right.
But no one's mentioning him, even though he is also another pretender when it comes to his mutant status.
Yes. I had forgotten that. He manipulated Scarlet Witch, and
Magneto knew that at the moment.
It's been a cool minute since I read the Children's Crusade, but I know Doom was somehow or another responsible, or revealed as responsible for her breakdown in that miniseries.
Dooms did something, and then Doom undid something when it comes in.
It's all highly convoluted.
Axis. I don't. It was very confusing what Doom's role in the whole lot was, and yet they invited him to the gala, no problem.
Right. It would seem that so you got that angle, and obviously that's what's leading into the trial of Magneto. It's kind of odd because to me, the obvious the obvious killer suspect is Mystique, because she has not gotten Destiny back, and Xavier and Magneto keep screwing her over. And doing something like that's both at once personal and undermines Krakoa seems like what she would do. However, we also know from advanced solicits that her plans seem to be coming to fruition in Inferno starting in October, or Inferno 2 if you prefer. So I don't know. I'm kind of weird on that one.
As far as Mystique, like you said, being an obvious suspect, she may seem very, very suspicious to us as the reader, but we know a whole lot of things when it comes to Mystique and Krakoa that the actual characters don't. So
True.
if she was behind it, there's a good way that she'd be getting away with it, because why would they suspect her? Especially since Xavier and Magneto can't really say too much about why Mystique would be pissed at them without
Yeah.
making everyone else start asking questions.
Well, I forget which issue it was in. Excuse me. But there's the scene where Magneto dances with Wanda and sort of offers this reconciliation at Olive Branch. And then the next scene for those characters is Wanda's body being found at the end of X Factor 10. Those two scenes don't reconcile very well. So case could be made that it wasn't Magneto that was reconciling with her to get her close and to let her guard down. It was Mystique. But we'll see. This Mystique subplot is absolutely one of my favorites coming out of this entire Krakoa era, because Mystique is typically portrayed as just the backstabber, right? But she's been given real depth and concern and feelings with this ongoing subplot concerning resurrecting Destiny. And she's a character now that is that's very sympathetic. She wants her loved one back. She wants her wife back. And she keeps getting screwed over by the people that are supposed to help that happen. I get it. I'd be pissed. And Mystique is exactly the type of person that would burn Krakoa to the ground as she's threatened to. So my money's on Mystique right now.
It's a pretty great point. But I want to tap into what the whole discussion is, because the whole whodunit vibe that's coming out of this Trial of Magneto and the death of Scarlet Witch works so well with just X-Men comics in general, because they tend to be a more like character-driven angle or corner of the Marvel universe where everybody's so into this drama and the relationships between all these characters, and then you just kind of throw a whodunit in the mix, and then you let speculation run rampant. Pretty smart move right now, and especially where things can get kind of convoluted. Tossing this wrench into gears while everything is expanding, while you've got X-Men #1 dropping into Planet-Size X-Men doing its thing, and now you've got this whodunit in the middle of it. It's sort of I can only think of curse words to use right now, but it's a mess, right? It's such a mess, and it's all who could have done this? And I think that's where a lot of again, what they did with the Hellfire Gala is so smart in getting everybody to constantly talk about it and always having this almost water cooler vibe about it, where you can constantly kind of follow up on it and everybody's tossing their speculation around, and really clever stuff, and part of that idea generation that this whole lineup's doing so well.
So, Nick, you mentioned that it has this whole whodunit vibe for Trial of Magneto. I've not seen that. Do we know that that's going to be the thing? It's like a mystery, or is it just a procedural Trial of Magneto?
Not sure yet. I don't think they've released any preview pages, at least not to my knowledge.
Right, yeah, I don't think we've seen anything specifically, but that just feels like what they're setting up, because you've got everything happening at this party. They discover a dead body, and then it's who could have done this, and what is the outside world thinking of this? And it just feels like such a natural progression for the story.
I would love it if it was a whodunit, because there are so many different angles that it could be taken. You have Exodus, who's been preaching anti-Wanda since literally the first time he said dialogue. You have Magneto and all of that. You have someone who wants to cause an intergalactic incident, because that groundwork was laid that the Kree-Skrull alliance is already not happy with Krakoa and how they've been treating Wanda. You have Cortez, who has reasons to be pissed off at Magneto.
He's
a little
pissing with the chip on his shoulder to everybody, and I absolutely love it.
And I think that of anyone to do a X-Men lore whodunit, I think Leah Williams is the best person, because she continuously shows that she has an understanding and a grasp of canon.
Yeah.
And I think she could weave something masterful out of a whodunit. So I hope that's what we get.
And I'll just say, Leah Williams, like, I'm not as well versed in Leah Williams as you are. Her X Factor is actually the only work of hers that I've read. And I frankly really enjoyed it. And we're definitely getting to the X Factor part of the conversation. But it's not new reader friendly. But on the other hand, it's dense with, like you were saying, an understanding of who these people are, what their backgrounds are, how they relate to one another, et cetera, et cetera. So she really is, I agree with you. She is a writer that could really thread some stuff together for Trial of Magneto and make it sing. So, I mean, other dangling plot threads, you've got over for Excalibur, you have England breaking diplomatic ties with Krakoa, which probably will only affect Excalibur. X-Corp kicked some Nazi butt, and I loved it. That's a title. I don't know too many people that were thrilled with the first issue. It was really dry, and the pacing was wonky, and it's exposition heavy. But that second issue that tied into the Hellfire Gala really sung. Fenris are great foils just because they're Nazis. God, just punch a Nazi. And there's a gross incest vibe between them.
Yeah. So I'm bad at remembering writers prior to me joining Comic Watch. So I don't know who wrote it, but Swordman's tenure in Thunderbolts, I will forever be bitter about, because I was not fully aware of who Andrea Strucker was when I read that.
Okay.
And I was a fan of Swordsman, and then I find out he's an incestuous Nazi. And Teenie Howard managed to pull what I liked about Swordsman's character and kind of pay tribute to that in X-Corp 2.
Yeah.
Even so much as him being called Swordsman and whipping out his sword.
So to speak. But, yeah, the X-Corp did a real big 180 between issues 1 and 2, and I feel like the second issue really showed off what that book is going to be better than the first issue did. And maybe it needed the Hellfire Gala setting to move that narrative forward a little bit. But it's such a unique book amongst the mutant books right now, and it needs somebody that can write a boardroom scene and make it interesting, you know? So the inclusion of Mastermind
that's really
now
the
in that
biggest
book.
problem that I think, like the X-Corp title, and like when issue 1 dropped, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be the only one who likes this because I like business drama. Like there was so much to me that happened in that, with like international business ties and kind of the global market, you know, what it means for what the X-Men introduced with the Krakoa era and how you kind of monetize that. And then what the legal standpoint of it is. I was like, oh, such juicy drama. And everybody was like, there's so much exposition. I don't care about this. And I was like, what about all the other X books? They're full of exposition and it's people talking. But when it comes to this, I'm the only one who likes it.
I think part of the problem is, and forgive me, I do not remember the artist's name on X-Corp, but it's a relatively safe and kind of basic and in non-flashy art style. And that doesn't help create any sense of drama. I mean, it's not bad art by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not the type of art that just grabs you by the throat and knocks you out, you know? So that didn't help either. But yeah, X-Corp, I feel, came into its own. We've got issue 3 coming next week, I believe. You can check out, shameless plug, you can check out a preview on the site now. But yeah, good stuff. You got the Terra Verde stuff over in X-Force that boiled over, and I really hope Beast gets his soon.
Killed.
Like, come on,
Throw him in the hole. Throw him in the hole.
Come
Throw
on,
him in the
Hank.
hole.
God, man.
Okay. I've
here's
seen
what's
X
killing
Twitter
me,
going
though.
crazy on that. Can y'all just give like a 30-second rundown on why Beast needs to be thrown in the hole?
So
Gabriel.
the shortest version is there is this other nation that was using plant technologies that is an enemy in X-Force, and Beast created essentially technological mind control, took over the country, made them agree to the alliance, and then just kept them as puppets until something went wrong and they were freed in the middle of the gala.
And he's done like that's only one of many shady things he's done in the course of X-Force so
And
far.
on top of that, when it all goes to shit and Beast is being forced to like face the consequences, his response is to blame Sage for being underhanded, and he's like bringing up like, oh, I hear you sighing, and it's like, let the girl sigh in peace, like you're a douche.
And as Ross jumped into the conversation and it pointed out he's practicing eugenics. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, Beast has been on a downward spiral, and I do enjoy that the Krakoan era is embracing that and continuing that because it didn't start there.
What's interesting, though, Gabriel, is I don't know if you were reading the books back in the Matt Fraction years, but this is literally the exact opposite of where Beast was during that time, as Cyclops was slowly getting more militant and pushing the moral gray zones. Beast was the voice of reason and the conscience, and eventually, saying, no, we're X-Men, we don't do this. And he eventually leaves the team because of that.
But then isn't that also exactly when he decides he's just going to say screw the timeline and drags the 05?
It's a little before that.
So I feel like that's where he started going down.
I think
his
you're right.
Ego.
Yeah, this sense of hubris. And that's really what drives him, is the sense of hubris, that he can just do whatever he wants because he's the smartest person in the room.
Throw him in the hole as long as his ego fits.
Listen, yeah, for sure. So, there's a few other loose things that came out from Hellfire Gala, but we came out of it with the launch of a new X-Men #1, almost 30 years to the month.
I think to me, I think one of the most interesting kind of dangling weird threads is was in Marauders with the Stepford Cuckoos and the whatever the former Hellfire children are calling themselves nowadays.
You mean the former Hellions?
No. Like from Wolverine and the X-Men, the Hellfire children, the little blonde girl, and like I think there's like Frankenstein.
Yes.
And there was this quick scene that they just kind of dropped on us, and this kept moving, where the Stepford Cuckoos are watching the girl from the I don't know her name.
I forget her name too.
Because
she's hilarious because she's this cute little girl that like murders animals and things.
Yeah. So the Stepford Cuckoos look at her and they're like, she doesn't know. We should tell her. And they're like, maybe we shouldn't. No, we're telling her. And I guess they told her, but they never tell us what the hell they told her.
Oh, I guess we'll find out. Man, Marauders just continues to be the book that keeps on giving. It is, from the original group of books, I think it's absolutely been the most consistent and the most entertaining, at least in my opinion. But, yeah, I did forget about that. There's just so much to absorb, so many little things and big things that happen. I mean, you got the obligatory Deadpool cameo, which I wasn't high on.
I appreciated it because that's been one of my big gripes with the Krakoa era is how quickly they forgot about their non-mutant allies.
Right.
So that's why I love the Juggernaut mini that we got for a little bit, because it did address how they're not really shunned; they're just not there.
You know, I only read the first issue of that, and I really need to go back and read it because I love Juggernaut. I love Fabian Nicieza. Yeah, No excuse, other than the fact that I read like at least 100 comics a month.
That sounds like a valid excuse right there.
I mean, between trades, back issues, new comics, omnibuses, yeah, I have a problem, guys. But Ross says it's very good and I'll love it. Thank you, buddy. X-Men #1. We're 35 minutes in and we haven't even gotten to this bad boy. The X-Men are declaring themselves the de facto protectors of Earth, which is right in line with what they're doing. They're kind of their general attitude. We do what we want. We don't care what you think of the Krakoa era. And I kind of liked it a lot. We had a big, goofy-looking mech, and we had the return of the U-Men from Morrison's new X-Men run. And we had some jaw-dropping art from Pepe Larraz. Yeah. As far as superhero punch 'em up goes, man, this book was like a 9 out of 10 for me.
I mean, I think I came onto this show mainly just to talk about X-Mech. Like, if I say one thing, it's that, like, if we're getting all these million spin-offs, can we just get an X-Mech spin-off? Like, I don't really care.
I don't care about the Avengers mech
that
crap that's going on elsewhere. Like, I do want the X-Mech.
Right? I'm so in love with everything about it. The rest of the issue was cool, but that was the gem.
I thought it was fun. I like the X-Mech. I just have to try not think about it too hard.
No, don't.
Because like X-23, I think, was in a boot pulling wires to do something. When you have someone who controls magnetism, like, why are you puppeting when Lorna could have just done that all by herself? It was a little bit confusing if you stop and you pause. So I guess don't stop and pause and think about X-Mech and what Lorna was doing in the toe. I don't know what that was. But it was
like, I'm a huge Power Rangers fan, and I come from that fandom where, like, it's okay to have 5 Power Rangers standing in the head holding a sword, and that somehow control the whole body. So I'm on board with this.
You see, I would have liked it so much better if she was just standing in the foot doing nothing, but she was pulling wires, and I was really confused. Of everyone, like Rogue, it made sense. Like, Rogue is super strong. Lorna just. What are you doing down there? Right? I was so confused. but she was pulling something for some reason. Maybe she got caught.
X-Mech. You absolutely should not overthink that.
But the issue as a whole, I found to be very fun, and I think that I enjoyed that. But it also left me confused.
The Krakoa era has been missing.
Yeah, it left me
flat out fun. Yes. And I'm waiting for Sync and Sunfire to contribute a little bit more. I mean, Sunfire especially, like, he was just barely even there that issue, That was disappointing because he's never gotten proper respect.
I did like that it was Sunfire who was asking Rogue's well-being. To me, that was a nice callback to an era and a relationship between that isn't really talked about that often. Back when Rogue kind of almost killed him.
She briefly had his powers, didn't she?
Yep.
That's right. That's a dark chapter in X-Men history, is that era.
I enjoyed that era, so...
Okay. That's where I fell off. I'm starting to catch up now, but...
It's a good callback to the Rogue miniseries that comes up in conversation a lot nowadays, where it introduced Blind Spot and Rogue and was a lot of the basis for, I'm going to say her name wrong, Alyssa Nitwe, who wrote the Rogue prose novel.
Okay. I know what you're talking about. I believe it is Alyssa Whitney, yes.
There you go. She drew from that miniseries quite a lot. So.
Okay, cool.
Seeing another callback to it made me a little bit happy.
Speaking of callbacks, like, can I just say that the return of Rogue's early 90s costume is just chef's kiss? Yeah.
It's a classic.
It's classic. It's iconic. let's not split hairs on that one. That is Rogue's freaking look. Just as much as Captain America's look is Captain America's look. Huh?
It needs to not change for a little bit. Like, let this moment happen for Rogue.
For real. She's my favorite X-woman, maybe my favorite X-person at any given moment. And yeah, Rogue rules and deserves to look her best at all times. So it's X-Men #1. It's irritating that they're renumbering it just because it's got a new creative team and sort of a new focus, which is funny because of all the Krakoa books, X-Men has had no focus because it'll take an issue or two setting things up and then sending those subplots off into the diaspora for future writers to deal with. Like, when are we ever going to get back to Brew being in charge of the damn Brood? Come on.
I appreciate the renumbering, actually, because it's a different creative team, it's a different plot, it's a different vibe. I think it's more different than the old X-Men than it is from any other title that it's running alongside. Like you said, like the old X-Men was just like, here's a plot point, throw it into the abyss, and maybe one day we'll talk about it. And now we have this, and granted it's only one issue, but it does have this kind of sense that we're gonna see more of the character dynamics. Just watching the characters interact, it feels more personal. And I think that numbering at 24, 23, I'm not sure where the last one ended off.
I think you're right with 23.
I think that it's that jumping in point that you guys were saying that really made Children of the Atom stand out.
True.
You can jump into X-Men #1, and while you'd be a little bit confused about what this whole growing tree nonsense is, you wouldn't be any more confused than me and my bad memory, who has no idea what's going on in the back of the book with the guy dying a lot. I don't know what that is.
That was different.
You wouldn't be any more lost if you haven't read any X-Men in years than I was.
Right? True story.
Like, I want to bring up the dangling thread because it's something that this issue does touch on. We had the huge first X vote where everybody got to cast a vote and choose the newest X-Men, and this is kind of the payoff of that, and we finally get to see that in action. And what did y'all think of Polaris' first issue as a flagship X-Men?
Well, first, this is definitely not her first time being an X-Man. But she's fine. It's really kind of irritating and makes me sad, though, that X Factor became the sacrificial lamb for her to become the a member of the X-Men. Which there's a lot to be said about that.
I actually don't think X Factor. I don't think it was like an A causes B. In X Factor #10, Leah Williams does talk a little bit about what that process was with the cancellation.
Yeah.
And it seems like they were two different things. So we might have lost Lorna if she didn't get picked up into X-Men.
I know. But God dang, she was so well handled by Leah.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm curious as to what's going to happen with Lorna. Now I'm hoping that they can, Leah kind of kick the ball forward a little bit. And Dugan's writing X-Men? Okay, yes. And Dugan can kind of continue the work that Leah was doing.
Yeah, I hope so. Although this definitely seems like it's going to be much more of an action-focused, straight-up superhero book than X Factor or really any of the other Krakoa books are. So, there's that. So, looking ahead, I mean, we've kind of touched on Trial of Magneto. The other big simmering book is Inferno Part 2. And that is, Hickman says this is everything that he's been building towards with the X-Men. So, it could be the end of an era. Like, I think this signifies the end of his 3-year contract with Marvel. Obviously, Marvel's got a cash cow on their hands, and they're not just going to let this stuff go, even if Hickman's not the man behind the curtain. Although it will look different without his involvement. But based on what we've seen, Inferno looks pretty impressive, because we've got both the Mystique subplot and the Orcus/Nimrod subplot all coming together, and I've said this more than once, it's with the understanding that the Moira X subplot is constantly hanging over the X-Men's head. And of course, if you remember from Hawks, every timeline where mutants assert themselves ends in tragedy. And I think that's where Hickman is moving towards with Inferno, is finally getting that subplot off the back bench and finally revisiting it. I mean, guys, thoughts?
I mean, I could run with it, I guess, because I agree. Marvel is not just going to be like, okay, we're done with the Krakoa era now. We're going to move on to something else because there's too much money behind it.
Yeah.
That's just ultimately how comics work, and that's where we're at right now. I don't have a lot of context for the previous Inferno and kind of what that's like hinting at for where we're moving at now. But it seems
I think
like,
it's just
Check's watch. It should be about time to bring up the Moira stuff. Like we've been sitting on that stuff for quite a while. Like, so if it comes around, it's not going to be like, oh, they're doing that. It's going to be like, oh, finally. And we'll see, I guess.
Well, I kind of feel like they're just borrowing the name Inferno.
Like Hellions and like Marauders.
Yeah. I don't feel like there's any connection beyond that between the two.
Unless this is where we finally get more Madeline Pryor to come back to life. That might be a connection that I would love to see, but I don't think we're going to get that.
I think we'll see that in Zeb Wells handle that at some point in Hellions, which just remains an absolute joy to read every month. By the way,
I am curious and I am skeptical about Inferno and what comes next. Simply because, like you said, there's been a lot of dangling done with X-Men. And if this is the end of Hickman's era, Hickman's run, there's still so many unresolved points. And some of them we can write off as being like Brew, just setting up a new status quo and leaving that as is. But there's still a lot more that just we haven't seen any resolution on. Like, what's going on with Gorgon? He died, he came back as something else, and then we never spoke about him again. What's going on with Omega Sentinel? We last saw her, she was a good guy in Human. Now she's a supervillain and she wants the X-Men dead. There's so many things that just weren't bothered answering questions, and if Inferno's all we got, I don't think we're going to get anywhere near as many answers as we should.
No. Yeah, this is diving into the Orcus and Mystique stuff and Moira X, as far as I can tell.
Exactly.
Like we were saying earlier, I think Hickman is content to let other writers deal with some of the subplots that have just kind of popped up and been left. And God, I hadn't even thought about the Omega Sentinel stuff, as frankly, that's a character I know very, very little about.
Omega Sentinel is one of my obsession characters because
okay.
I know there's not many of us, but I was obsessed with the Genoshan Excalibur, which is where Omega Sentinel really first got her action scenes in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's like 6 of us who are obsessed with that comic, and no one really cares about us 6.
Oh, so you're the ones.
We're the ones.
That's funny. See, over in the comments, Ross says that Hoxpox was Act 1, Inferno is Act 2, and honestly believes there will be a third act. I don't disagree with that, although I would say that X of Swords is the end of Act 1, and Hellfire Gala seems like it's the end of Act 2. That's kind of my setup, but that could change depending on what goes down after Inferno.
I would disagree that Act 2 would be X of Swords to Hellfire, simply because I don't feel like anything really happened. Like, it was such a short block of time. You're covering from X of Swords and immediately preparing for the Hellfire Gala. There wasn't really too much movement between the two. If anything, I would agree. I agree that X of Swords would be end of Act 1, and then we've just been an intermission, and now we're starting Act 2.
Could be, yeah. That's actually not a bad way to look at it. So I guess there's really one major thing that we still need to get at, and it goes back to both X Factor and Hellfire Gala. And we would be remiss and frankly a little irresponsible if we didn't add to some responsible discourse to the events surrounding X Factor number 10. This is a tough one, and I'm probably not the most qualified person in the room to speak to it. Gabriel, you wrote a fantastic and incredibly heartfelt review for that comic. And, by now we're all aware of what transpired and some of the incredibly toxic fan backlash that resulted from it. But would you care to offer some thoughts on X Factor number 10?
Sure. So if it's not been clear by what I was saying earlier, I am a huge fan of Leah Williams. I think I've covered almost every Marvel book she's released since I've joined Comic Watch. I was a fan of Gwenpool Strikes Back. I even enjoyed Amazing Mary Jane. And for me, each title that Leah Williams takes on, I see her getting better. And there could be a lot of excuses, I think, as to what went wrong with X Factor 10. But it handled some really, really sensitive topics, and it was delivered in a way that it didn't feel, at least to me, it didn't feel like it was giving respect to that topic. So spoilers, if you've not read X Factor 10, it focuses on discovering why Prodigy died and was resurrected in X Factor 1. And he was a victim of a serial killer that targeted queer black men. And we finally get that big reveal in X Factor number 10. And Prodigy is confronting his killer. And he receives backup from iBoy and then later Dakin and Aurora. But the whole scene is only 4 pages long. And from the moment it's revealed why Prodigy died to when they leave and return to the gala. And it's not enough time to give that topic justice. We see iBoy doing a Kamehameha for some reason, and that's not really fully explained, but that takes up time. Is the evolution of iBoy's power, which has been a thread in X Factor. We see Dakin and Aurora flirting and accepting each other's darker side, which was a plot line in X Factor. And it was just too much in those 4 pages when it could have been used to show Prodigy gaining justice or gaining closure or gaining something. But it's almost like the scene's not even about him pretty quickly. And I think that was a big misstep that was done. And then it's made even worse because almost immediately after, if not immediately after, we see Prodigy and iBoy fine. Like, they're joking, they're commenting on iBoy's new power, and even Prodigy is unaffected by what he discovered. And then, like a page later, it's Wanda's body and discovered by her son, which is just it's like a lot of trauma thrown out there without processing. And to me, it felt like a misstep. And there could be a lot of things that contributed. The fact that it had to be a Gala tie-in, which I do think Leah handled well by making a lot of the tie-in aspects happen in other books instead of in X Factor to save up page space. You have Dakin getting into a conflict with Wildchild over in Hellions. You have Richter and Shatterstar reuniting over in Excalibur. So she did good work not taking up that space, but it still wasn't. It wasn't enough, in my opinion, and it was I found it to be very disappointing because I feel like I can say that I think I know that Leah Williams had the best intention at heart, but it just didn't land.
You know, she's kind of, and Nick and I were talking about this just a couple days ago. It was a really no-win situation because she had so many plot lines to quickly wrap up and limited space to do it in while still having to put the requisite Hellfire Gala stuff in there. And it sucks because I don't think she was going to be able to pull that off no matter what unless the book hadn't been canceled.
But at the same time, I feel like this, with it being such a sensitive situation, this is the one time I say let the plot dangle. Either let the plot dangle or change gears. And one thing I also want to say, and I'm not trying to like shift blame or share blame. One thing that I did see that I did find very interesting that I think is also worth noting. Leah Williams did not storycraft that book on her own. It even says it right in the credits that her and David Baldeon created that story together, but all of the vitriol online was aimed at the woman.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just that the fandom didn't realize that David Baldeon had a hand in the story, or if they just never bothered to look, or if it's the potentially blatant sexism that reared its ugly head. But I think that there's so many layers of, I've seen it so many times. There's discourse and the discourse about the discourse and discourse about the discourse about the discourse. And I think it uncovered so much stuff about the industry and the fandom. And I don't know if it's going to, even that like meta narratively is going to be addressed as well as it should.
I think it would have been really nice, and I think it would have easily been doable if, like what you said, that subplot was left dangling, and then at some point there was a one shot that was given to Leah and David Baldeon to wrap all that up, that just focus on that.
Nick?
If I could just add to that point a little bit, because I want to touch on, we've talked about this for quite a few days now, especially like in our Slack chat. We had the episode where on the Comic Watcher show where we're talking about it. And to think, we're seeing a lot of that happen with Way of X right now, where Nightcrawler is still sort of figuring out what a sense of spirituality will look like for mutants, where our own familiarity with spirituality is so based heavily in the life-death cycle that means something different for the mutantdom right now. And we've seen Nightcrawler kind of not necessarily criticizing, but trying to wrap his head around the fact that, the traditional sense of a soul and sort of what spirituality means with the removal of a life-death cycle like what we have with mutants and being able to be reincarnated. And some of that trauma that carries over from, being reincarnated like that and being brought to life, if you dangle that plot thread, is it not a natural fit for what Nightcrawler is trying to piece together right now?
I think it definitely would. I think it definitely would fit there. I think that if Cy Spurrier, is that he's writing Way of X?
Yeah, Cy Spurrier.
I'm getting better. I think if Cy Spurrier was to kind of pick that up and give us Prodigy processing everything that he went through, I think that could help kind of mitigate it. But I would, more than anything, I would love if Marvel was to listen to all of the feedback and give Prodigy a title or a mini or a one shot to process and have it be written by a queer black man.
Absolutely.
Because it is a story about a queer black man, specific to him being queer, specific to him being black. And like I said, I think Leah Williams had the best intent, but I think that for the story to be told the way it needs to be told, I think it needs to be told by a queer black man or a queer black person at the very least.
Behind that, I can definitely get behind that. But any way you slice that, there's absolutely no excuse for the just toxic vitriol that manifested online directed at Leah. And to my knowledge, I don't think she's publicly had any statement in that fallout, has she, Gabriel?
She has, as far as I'm aware of, she's not posted anything on Twitter
Okay.
since before X Factor dropped.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's been active on other social media or if any other statements have been made. But I know that she's not said anything at all, like not a reshare, not a post, not nothing then. But I do agree, like the Vivitrol was out of line, it was excessive, it was extreme and unnecessary. And to me, the most telling fact is the people who were speaking up against it, while also speaking up against X Factor 10, acknowledging that it was a problem, talking about how it was a problem, talking about how it could have done better and how they felt. But at no point did any of them advocate for the personal attack on Leah Williams. And these are intellectual, smart comic readers, comic critics, comic podcasters, people who are queer, people who are black, who are out there saying, and I think that those are the people that should be listened to, because once more, it's a story about a black queer person. And I think that it's their voices, their pain, that people need to be paying attention to, far more than even me. I think that is who everyone should be taking their lead from.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. We have, especially as X-Men fans, as fans of a group of individuals that champion individuality and standing up for the little guy and the oppressed, it's so important that we should reflect those values. Because if we're not, then you're just another gatekeeper, man. And if you're gonna say you love something, then you need to try to live by it. I mean, it really comes down to that. There's just because you're online and you think you're invincible because nobody knows who you are, doesn't give you the right to be a troll or to threaten to kill a writer because they did something you didn't like. And I mean, we keep having to have this conversation about something or another in fandom and that breaks out every now and again. And it's like, when you going to learn your lesson? Stop being an ass. Don't be that guy. It's fine to be passionate about something, but it's never okay to become the type of person that threatens and harasses creators online just because something happened that you don't like. But yeah, I think we can agree Prodigy deserves better, and that subplot definitely deserved to be handled in a more respectful and responsible way. And missed moment on Marvel's behalf, big time.
And it's like you said, it's a missed moment. It can't be undone. But
there is
definitely things that Marvel can do to rectify it. But I don't have confidence that they will.
We'll see. Like Nick and I were just talking a couple days ago on the other show that Marvel they're showing two different faces, right? Because on the one hand, you've got the United States of Captain America, which just excellent, ballsy, diverse, representative statement. And then you've got incidents like this on the other side of things. So they've got to get more consistent. And that's always going to be hard when you have corporate overlords to answer to.
I like the way you said consistent, because like I did enjoy United States of Captain America, the first issue, but a lot of what Marvel has been doing in terms of diversity is kind of like throwing it out there and then moving on to something else.
Yeah.
And there needs to be follow through if we're to believe that they really mean what they're saying.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. So with that, despite that misstep, I'm still really excited for where the X-Men are going. I've said this countless times, but I've been reading comics and the X-Men for 30 freaking years now, and I don't think I've ever been as excited for the X-Men line wide as I am right now. I mean, they're just doing some incredibly interesting things that push the envelope, and they're just not what fans are expecting. And that's really, that in and of itself has reignited the fandom for the X-Men. And Yeah, it's good stuff. And there's good stuff coming, even when they do screw up. Their batting average is still pretty solid.
And like you said, I'm more excited about X-Men than I have been in a while.
Yeah.
For me, it's less about the storylines and more about the diversity of style and the creatives. I am, even in this show, I am always vocal about my opinion about how the old X-Men title were handled and the lack of character moments. But then in the same line, we also have what Vita Ayala is doing in New Mutants, which their entire Hellfire Gala tie-in was character moments.
Yes.
So I think that diversity of talent, I think, is a great thing they're doing, the way they're working together. So even if Hickman leaves, I hope that someone else becomes that head of X position, because I think that has made a much more cohesive line than I ever remember seeing.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And, credit where credit's due. Despite missteps, he's given the X-Men such an astonishing shot in the arm.
Mm-hmm.
And
the story concept is incredible.
Yes, it really, truly is. Even when something doesn't work, you can't say they're not trying to do something unique. So, with that, I think we've hit the end of our show. Thank you all so very much for listening. Duna will be back in 2 weeks, I believe. If not sooner, but probably 2 weeks. Yes.
2 weeks. Next show's in 2 weeks.
Okay. Only Duna knows what's planned, but it's going to be amazing. So thank you all so much for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Watch the Mutants. You can follow the main show, Comic Watcher Show, at C Watcher Show, and of course, get all of your fandom news and pro reviews from comic-watch.com. Thank you so much. I'm Matt, that's Gabriel, and that's Nick. Till next time, folks, take care, be good to each other, and read something cool.